Hey, Jogen.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it.
Hey, you're
Um,
welcome.
when I first started doing this, like having people back was actually the thing I was most excited about was kind of being able to deepen conversations or explore other areas.
Yeah.
And I know for you, you have such a like you have such a foundation in Zen, but then you have all these other areas of interest that you bring in the kind of the transformational mix that you
Mm-hmm.
create. So
Yeah.
I'm excited today to get to talk like about masculinity and
Uh-huh.
maybe some of the challenges within masculinity and maybe some of the more, whether you want to call it sacred or divine masculine. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But like before we start, you cool if we just take a little moment and kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
settle? I
Mm-hmm.
can relax some anxiety.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, one place I thought it would be interesting to just start is a curiosity on my end for like what masculinity means to you because it's such a can be a broad word and has a lot of meaning right now, and I'm just wondering if you were to sort of hold it and kind of speak to the different things it might mean for you.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Just dive right into
So yeah, well, I mean, I'll sort of
the
like set the foundation of it of like where we'll be going, like what are we even
Yeah.
talking about here?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
Well, when I think about it energetically, I think about certain ways of being.
Hmm.
I think of boundaries and I think of warriorship and I think of stability and I think of active energy. And then when I think about it as far as is a person masculine or not, maybe I look for those qualities. There's also something ineffable to the point where I'm not often sure what we mean by the word masculine apart from those more archetypal energetic, modes.
Yeah, even when you say that, as someone that presents masculine, right, like being a man and does work with men around masculinity in therapy and other contexts, in the ways we're sort of conditioned and impacted. Like, I still don't quite know what it means either. And I don't even sometimes know if it's the right word, right? Like masculine, because it has such a charge if you're going to look at sort of cultural conditioning versus biology
Mm-hmm.
and like what's going on in the culture around masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering for you, like if there's other words, sort of like I know yin and yang sometimes, or other ways of containers beyond the gendered way that kind of
Mm-hmm. That
that you
express.
yeah, that express these sort of this essence or this sort of qualities that you're alluding to, whether that's the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries or the protective
Mm-hmm.
impulse or the
Mm-hmm.
pushing out that kind of can happen with a masculine sense.
I don't think I do. I think I
Yeah.
find myself leaning on that word.
Yeah, like maybe that's why these words are still held, even though they
Yeah.
are charged and kind of loaded, that they do
Yeah.
hold something important there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't have masculinity and gender and sex tied together in my mind
Mm.
necessarily,
Yeah.
which often they get confused. But I think masculine is a useful reference, the polarity of the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah. And if we're speaking of the polarity here, like, how do you hold the feminine then? If there's the masculine, as you sort of alluded to earlier, like how do you see the
Hmm.
feminine in relationship?
Receptivity is the
Yeah.
first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Receptivity. Well, here's a further distinction that again I feel like dangerous going into this territory because someone's going to listen and go, "Hey, that's not how I am, and I identify as you know."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is thank you for just like naming that right now. We're like talking about something fairly charged right
It's
here.
fairly charged.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
also important enough, I think, to try to sit with both like knowing these energies and also understanding the ways that they've maybe been distorted and kind of uh, take a really unhealthy expression, it seems, in our culture.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you were going to say something there before you kind of alluded to the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say one way I would describe masculine is agency and independence is a
Mm-hmm.
masculine quality, and what I'm calling feminine is more relational and more receptive.
Yeah, yeah,
And, you know, sometimes you see that those who identify as women are more relationship focused, and those who identify as men are more mission focused.
yeah. Like
And
there
whether
is
that's,
a grouping there, but it isn't essential. There can be a
right.
wide range of possibility within there.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
know, and nature and nurture is a good question, whether this is just because men have historically been conditioned to be, you know, in our societies, the breadwinners up until just a couple generations ago,
Mm-hmm.
and the women were tending to the family, that kind of stereotype. Or is it an archetypal energetic thing that comes through people?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And like how much does physiology play into that? And
Absolutely.
like I have no idea. And I'm not really interested in like solving the question of nature or nurture personally.
Did you ever watch the NPR episode on testosterone?
Yeah, was that I think it was like a radio lab, right? Or
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I remember that where the guy had a disease of some sort where he lost testosterone production and yeah, can you say more for you? Like,
Well, I'll tell you what stuck out for me. There was the thing that stuck out most for me was so two things. There was a woman who they gave testosterone
oh
therapy
yeah.
to, and she found herself getting more dominant and more aggressive.
Yeah, and her sexuality changed too, right?
Hit the roof.
Yeah, but it was like she described like a sort of imagistic fantasy-based sexuality
Yeah,
and then more sort of seeming lower down, just
yeah,
looking at bodies.
yeah, yeah. So that, as far from the biological side, that catches my attention. And then
Yeah.
related, one element was there was this workplace where people voted to see who would have the most testosterone
Mm-hmm.
based on qualities that are typically associated with the masculine, like dominance, for example. And everybody was right. And it
That was
was
an
a
accurate.
yeah, it was right. There was a woman in this office who had the highest testosterone.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That it was. Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
That makes me think too of this one study, and I don't think I can say it succinctly, but they did a study on like primates. I think it was gorillas, and they made one of the silverbacks the lowest on the totem pole, like the hierarchy, and they made the lowest the highest through whatever social conditioning, and they found that like their role is completely reversed. That the testosterone changed, but like the previous dominant gorilla became kind of neurotic, weird, got more diseases, and then the one that was diseased and neurotic became sort of this shining, strong gorilla male. So like it feels even nature and nurture is like more confusing than we want to give it credit for.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious for you kind of like when this came alive for you within your like explorations. Like when did you start to investigate and become curious around masculinity for yourself and like the people you work with?
Hmm. Well, it has been an issue since I was a little boy
Yeah.
because my father died when I was 7.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's been a pivotal event that has been like an organizing principle of my psyche.
Yeah. That's been a
Yeah,
sort of driving force in ways for your life.
it's just pivotal, and that from that event, and he died of cancer. So before that, not by any fault of his own, he was absent,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think what I recognize is I looked for masculinity. There was some instinct that I needed it, and I have thought about the different people in my life that I was getting a hit of that off, or getting that modeling
Mm-hmm.
and internalizing off different people, like my grandfather, and then certain friends. who I
Mm-hmm.
thought carried masculinity. I would be gravitate towards them. And then I feel like it wasn't until I found my main Zen teacher that I saw healthy masculinity actually embodied.
And this is Hogan, right? Or
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. Like you actually felt like there was a masculinity you wanted to
I did.
like transmit. Like you wanted that transmitted to yourself in a way, whatever version it would become for you.
I mean, I at the time I was 24 when I first met him, and I
Yeah.
didn't know what was going on. But now, looking back, almost 20 years later, I see that part of what magnetized me to him is he embodies masculinity imperfectly, of course,
As a human
but
would.
yeah, but in a robust and powerful way.
Yeah.
He's been willing to step into those energies really strongly, and so that was a model for me that I'm grateful for. In some ways, I was reparented.
Yeah. And did you feel he took some role in that and sort of uh supporting you and working with your masculinity, whether directly or indirectly?
I If he did, it was just by being who he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He did, he would emphasize certain qualities that I might call masculine. Again, I feel like I'm on thin ice with that. He did emphasize certain things like challenge. Sometimes I associate the value of being challenged, like going through challenge equals growth, as a kind of masculine mode of development.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's true or not, uh,
Yeah, I mean, these are what's true for you, right?
okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
He would really encourage that.
Yeah.
He would encourage that. He always encouraged to feel deeply,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
to feel deeply. He was very, a lot of integrity around relationship,
Mm-hmm.
a lot
Yeah,
of
when I've
integrity.
met him, he had a very upright quality that
He's a
I
very upright man. Yeah,
very
yeah.
sort of yeah.
And he respects his wife profoundly and deeply. And I see him, I don't see, I don't see any misogyny, and I don't see sexism in him.
Yeah. And for listeners, right, like Hogan and Chosen, they teach together. It seems equally, just from my outsider view. I mean, you would know much better.
Yeah,
You would know much better.
it's complicated,
Yeah. Like
but
all things are. But I mean, it felt like, oh, these two people are doing a dance around running this place.
yeah,
That's
definitely.
more what I meant more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like you're 7, your dad dies, which leaves a sort of a hole in a way. And it sounds like the absence before then too, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
naturally are gravitating towards male figures.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find Hogan,
Mm-hmm.
and when you look back, you see that he was holding something for you there around
Absolutely.
masculinity.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you when the exploration of masculinity became conscious, like when you started to
Mm-hmm.
more investigate it yourself and be curious about it. And you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? That sort of
Yeah.
natural kind of gravitation versus like, oh, this is a thing
Mm-hmm.
that I need to look at and work with.
I think it began around the same time I started practicing Buddhism.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so long before Chosen became one of my teachers. And I was working with a man and a woman and really feeling the differences there. And I was also seeing the different issues that the young men had in our community versus the women.
Yeah.
So it became an incidental study of, well, what does it mean to be a guy, especially in my 20s and 30s? What does that mean, and how do we navigate? There are particular challenges.
Well, what would you see in the community there of the young men or men that were
Mm-hmm.
in your Zen community?
Mm-hmm. I would see, very rarely did the men in their 20s, especially their 20s, sometimes even into 30s, have the capacity to really inhabit their emotional life.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So vulnerability was marginalized, or just they're out of touch with it. And and of course this was me too.
Yeah. When you're in your 20s there too.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And so they were attracted to Zen because it has an impersonal and transpersonal emphasis.
Yeah, it has a bit of a warrior-like quality, right?
Yeah.
There's a fierceness, and pain is valued in a certain way.
Can be stoicism. The good stuff of stoicism is valued. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I noticed that. I noticed uh, all, and then I noticed this even more as I became a teacher. Almost every, I started teaching at Reed College fairly early in my training,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was working with men and women, but a lot of the guys felt the connection with me in 18, 19, 20. I was not that much older than them. Maybe I was 28 at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of issues around pornography,
Hmm.
sexuality, not knowing how to deal with sexual energy,
Yes.
inner conflict around the shame they felt around that and their relationships with the women they were sexual with. So, like, that whole confusion about I do objectify and yet I'm attracted to women, and how do I navigate this? And I saw that
Mm-hmm.
none of us had any real education on how to work with sexual energy or understand this.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to kind of start, as you name
Sure.
it. There's sort of the sexual quality of the masculine and objectifying and porn
Yeah.
use and
Yeah.
kind of what it just seems the milieu of growing up as a man
Yeah.
in at least Western culture. I remember hearing the other day there was a study where they were trying to do a study of the effects of porn on young boys or young
Uh-huh.
men, and they
Uh-huh.
couldn't find a control group.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they couldn't find
Wow.
like a 12 they couldn't find 12-year-olds that hadn't watched porn to make a control group for the study.
Wow. That's sad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so for you, right? Like what's with the struggle around sexuality and males? Like what's going on there? Do you have any answers or
Just
any
got
insight?
theories. I just got
Yeah,
theories.
yeah, theorize away, man. I'll take what you can get. I struggle, so I could use some help.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think testosterone is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, and this is, I'm not excusing anybody. This isn't, men are not victims of masculinity, excuse me, of testosterone,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a force that we aren't educated on how to understand it.
Yeah, even knowing it's a force that has a power over us and that we
Yeah.
might need to have a boundaried relationship with it or to like
Yeah.
really look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it might be getting a little bit better in the, as we've moved into the 2010s and 20s and more consciousness growing, but the Gen X folks, and probably true for millennials, we grew up in a culture that very much still objectified women,
Mm-hmm.
and women are sexual objects.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you think that does to us to kind of live in that culture with such a strong emphasis on objectifying and
Well, here's the tricky thing:
yeah.
the mind is magnetized towards beauty.
Mm-hmm. I know. I'm
That's
looking at
our,
that painting behind you. Like, I keep getting
yes.
pulled towards
Oh, cool.
it.
Yeah. So I believe that's archetypal.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody is masculine sex and gender, they are going to find the feminine beautiful in
Mm-hmm.
general. That's going to be, they're going to be drawn towards that. And unless you're enlightened, you live in a world of objects.
Yeah.
You live in a world of separation.
Yeah.
So there's this natural thing going on where I mean, from as young as I can remember, I've just been like, oh, girls, like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah. And you make eyes there, right? Like the eyes get drawn and pulled.
girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then puberty comes, and oh, not only can I look at them, but I can touch them and do
Mm-hmm.
this thing. And so that natural archetypal draw, the testosterone plus the culture, like, it just came to mind was Vanna White.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wheel of
On Wheel of
Fortune.
Fortune. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Here's the show, and there's this woman being objectified. Her body's on display for no reason.
Yeah, to turn a card, and they don't even have cards later on, right? It's just a digital screen, but she
Yeah.
still goes and like touches the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've never heard her talk. I've watched that. My mom watched that show
Right.
like every day when I was growing up.
Right. Yeah.
Never heard her voice.
No.
Yeah.
So I and many of us are cultured just to see the objectification of women and the objectification of their bodies. And unless you grow up with a feminist and or someone who had studied feminism, had that consciousness, I doubt in the 80s, 90s that you received an understanding of what was going on.
Yeah, like an awareness of the kind of culture we're being
Yeah.
brought up in, and the way
Yeah.
we're like behaviors that are normalized that maybe should be challenged in some way or looked at
Absolutely.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I had the blessing of some conscious women who, as I started dating, pointed some of that out to me.
Oh, you had some good mirrors to kind of show you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But so that's my working theory of why that happens.
Yeah. And you know, like for myself, and I've seen with others, maybe people that kind of take on a growth or a spiritual sort of mindset, right? Like there can be a bit of cutting off around the sexual energy. Like it almost like you're saying, testosterone is a force to be reckoned with. And maybe beyond that, right? Even these archetypal energies
Yeah.
that it's hard to work with. And
Yes.
sometimes it's sort of like, like I'm just gonna sort of tune that out. You know, I'll meditate 2 hours a day and I'll tell people about that, but I won't talk to them about the half an hour porn I watch a day either. Or like whatever, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I guess I feel like I'm circling something. I'm trying to get towards it, like around. It is a force. It is a lot in ways for some people, right? And I think there's a different spectrum around kind of anyone in their sexuality.
Hmm.
But like, what supports us or supported you in being able to turn towards that force and work with it versus letting it kind of just run rampant or
Yeah.
pushing it away?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a really good question for my particular background. And this is a unique situation. So the thing that I have a hard time with is it's not so accessible to others. But in a nutshell, when I went into the monastery, a couple years in, I took a vow of celibacy,
Oh man.
which
Y-
I chose.
Yeah, yeah.
I chose it, and it was about 5 or 6 years all in all, where even long, long periods where I wouldn't even masturbate. Um,
So in there were some periods of masturbation, but there was
well, I
six
couldn't.
years.
Yeah, I couldn't maintain the boundaries around it
Yeah, yeah.
because
That was a
because
edge you were working with there.
yeah,
Yeah.
the energy was too intense.
Oh.
But didn't have a sexual relationship for 5 or 6 women, and excuse me, 5 or 6 years. What? That was funny.
Freud would love that.
Yeah, that was a. Is that a Freudian slip? Maybe.
It was a slip of some sort.
Here's what I was like kind of coming up for me was I had to learn to work with objectification of women on a mental level in order to maintain celibacy.
Oh, yeah. Say more about that.
So when I first went into this, it was basically in the warrior spirit. It was, oh, other mystics and monks have said that your sexual energy becomes sublimated into the force of awakening. It's chi. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, technically, it's jing.
Oh, I don't know those
In the
distinctions.
Chinese energy system, there's three energies, and jing is the sexual force, and you can deplete it. You don't necessarily get it back.
Okay.
So, but Buddhist monasticism has, I feel, a complicated relationship around sexuality. So here I was, an idealistic 20 something, reading these texts, and I just thought,
How old were you when you like you're a couple years in the
I was
monastery?
26 when I took a vow of celibacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Whew.
So I did it out of a warrior spirit, and because I wanted to be the best monk I could be and be like correct and do it right and
Yeah, you
all of
like
those
looked up
things.
towards these sort of
Yeah.
historical figures and maybe
Yep.
people you knew too,
Yep.
and we're like, I'm gonna be like them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt, well, if they had to do all this stuff to know what it means to be enlightened, then why would I be any different?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I took that on when I ordained, which is in 2006.
Okay, it was
And
part of the ordination for you in a way.
yeah, I chose, and my teachers tried to say, why don't you just take a 2 year vow? Or why don't you?
Oh wait, you said it at 5 years or
I
6 years?
did.
Oh yeah,
And I
you
didn't
were
keep it.
going for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't keep it. I broke that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But in trying to maintain it, I had to look at the mind and sexual fantasy more and the objectification of women.
Mm-hmm.
So it began as a mind training. because if you're going to be celibate, you can't let your mind run with sexual fantasies, because before you know it, you're going to end up masturbating.
Yeah, like you don't want that energy to build up enough where you
Exactly.
can't say like you can't get off that train.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You.
that for you was like a sort of meditative process of catching the fantasy, and is it redirecting attention or working with the
Absolutely.
energies in the
Yeah.
body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was starting to sublimate. It's true. There's a grain of truth to all of that. It's
And
energy.
for those that don't know, like sublimation is a Freudian concept around kind of transmuting those base energies,
Uh-huh.
and it goes way deeper than Freud, right? Like it's been
Yeah.
happening for a long time.
Alchemical. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's supposed to add to the energetic system. Like there's more energy
Yeah.
available for the spiritual pursuit. Am I catching that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you could think of it as, so we have erotic energy. Eros lives in us,
Mm-hmm.
and you can take that on a genital or a physical interpersonal relationship, but the connection to the divine,
Mm.
if you cut off that lower outlet, and I use lower in quotes,
Mm-hmm.
with the right intention, it will then seek a higher channel. That's the theory of sublimation and my
Okay.
understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you found it worked a bit.
Well, it worked a bit, but that was, that was my kind of self-centered idea around it. But the good thing was I began to actually really see how much I did relate to women as objects.
Mm,
I
mm-hmm.
lived with very attractive women at times.
Yeah, Zen. I mean, and maybe some folks who don't know, like Zen centers are relationships. I don't know the
Yeah.
policies at the place you were at too well,
Yeah.
but like relationships happen,
Yep.
especially in your 20s. It seems to be
Yep.
like I didn't know that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
you could go to a Zen center and find partners.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great place for it.
It's like in my 30s, I look back, I'm like, oh, that was it's like the spiritual spring break. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there were attractive women around you that you were
There are attractive women
objectifying.
around, and I'm working on this at first just because I want to sublimate the energy. But then I realize, oh, this helps me see women more clearly,
Oh,
and this helps me have mature relationships with women that aren't compromised
yeah,
by my sexuality. It didn't get
yeah.
in there and complicate it. It was so much more simple. I developed a friendship with a married woman, um, that I've been friends with her now for 15 years during that time,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think would have been really complicated by the way I was coming in as a 20-year-old relating to sexual energy.
Yeah. Even when you say like seeing women clearly, like I just feel my body relax when you say that. Like a sort of like, oh, yeah. What do you see there as you started to see women more clearly? I imagine you saw how you all the things you did on top of that, right? Like that. The,
Yeah, that's nicely said. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's. I would say I'm still in the process of really removing projection.
mm-hmm.
I'm interested in talking about the anima.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
could get into
I'll
that.
take a little note here for the
That's
anima.
yeah. That's something I really have been approaching the last several years more directly. I mean, in a way, it's as simple as I could just like listen more and like relate to this
Oh,
person as just like a friend who has common struggles,
yeah.
not as this mythical object that might give me this pleasure or this confirmation of me as a man.
Yeah, like a human in their own right, not a human for your own definition or your own needs
Yeah.
or
This
bolstering
sounds
of the
so
ego.
remedial.
Yeah. But I mean, it's important. I think.
I know, but as I'm saying this, I'm like, well, this is so remedial. Like, of course you should be able to do that.
Yes.
But the way we're socialized, and maybe also biology, makes that not so simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our like just the studies around women and culture and like the higher incomes for women that are attractive, and there's all these sort of points of data that like this is so embedded in our culture, and I think it would be it's wrong to ask people to initially be apart from their culture. Like it takes
Mm,
work
yeah,
to
yeah.
look at this and see this. Like I know for me, like we have similar but different backgrounds. Like my dad left me when I was about the same age your dad died,
Yeah. Okay. I'm
so it's a
sorry.
different sort of complication.
Mm-hmm.
But raised by a woman, and I always had like a complicated relationship with masculinity. But I went to a graduate school that was in feminist training. It was
Mm-hmm.
feminist therapy. They wouldn't say
Oh,
that, but
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading a lot of literature and like having to contend with like just because I've disidentified doesn't mean I'm not participating in maleness,
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
still benefiting from the privilege and all
Mm-hmm.
these sort of shadow ways it still plays out.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just all of this like literature around the way men are that I never read. It was just
Mm-hmm.
watching it play out everywhere.
Yeah.
Like like oh yeah, people have a clue of how we are
Yeah.
that we don't, and you could read about it. Like there was this one like men will talk first in a group. Like it's just they'll talk first in a group, and men will feel uncomfortable if like the conversation is not 80% male dominated in a room. And I was like in a graduate course, and there was like 25 people in the room, and the first four people that spoke were the four men in the group, and the rest were women. And it was just like these small little things around like how embedded we are, I think, in these
Mm-hmm.
practices of maleness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we touched on sexuality a bit there. And I mean, it might be a good segue for anima, right? Because they're kind of linked in a way. This sort of the outward women in our lives, and then this
Mm-hmm.
inner. You speak to anima. I'm not even going to summarize what it is. Like, what is anima for you? And it's come alive for
I
you in the
don't
last couple of years.
know. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I might be asking you to be too specific, but like,
No, it's okay. Well, I
yeah.
certainly don't represent the Jungians,
Oh, okay.
and and I can't say I represent Jungian theory, though I'm influenced by that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe inner feminine is a better term.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is the exciting part of working with men now around this because I found this so healing. Why this almost blind compulsion towards the woman
Mm.
as that which is going to complete?
Yes.
Why is that such a force?
Yeah.
When I started practicing meditation, I saw how much that power that had over my mind. It was really amazing how much attraction there is, how strong that attraction is. It can define a whole life.
Yeah. And you were speaking of the objectifying earlier,
Yeah.
but I think you're touching a different level there, the sort of
Yeah.
archetypal, fantastical pull that we have,
Yes.
like the stories and the fantasies we
Yeah.
build around what's going to happen
Yeah.
when this object becomes ours or we can join.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. As you know, what is unknown in us or unintegrated, we could see in others. The world reveals through the other.
Mm.
Right? That's like the shadow. We literally can't see the shadow,
Mm-hmm.
but actually it's coming towards us in the form of other people.
Yeah.
And so my own, let's say, a quality that, especially when I was younger, really attracted me about women was if they were playful.
Oh, yeah.
I was so serious.
You sounded serious. You took a 5-year vow.
Yeah, I was a serious dude in those times.
I'm glad you worked on it, man. I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah, and that's a Saturnian quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is seriousness, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was really serious. So a woman who was lighthearted or playful, that was so intoxicating.
Yeah. And I imagine sometimes in the dance of flirtation or connection, you could be playful for moments if the woman
I
was
could be
playful.
playful. That's right.
Yeah.
But it depended on my proximity and relationship to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so over time, through different practices, as I won that back in myself, instead of just thinking it resided in her, I started to learn it from her,
Mm-hmm.
find it in myself. Then that compulsion goes away.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I don't love women. Doesn't mean I don't want a partnership or feel like I'm expanded by it. But a certain kind of, well, what projection is can be withdrawn.
Yeah. So when you're talking of anima here, it's this sort of mirror that the other provides, the sexual other, and women in this case, I think for both of us, but
Mm-hmm.
and that we put something onto them and are drawn and pulled to that because that's what we are needing to recognize in ourselves and
Yeah,
whether integrate or cultivate or allow for.
yeah,
And like
yeah.
you found
Nicely
through
said.
that there's less of that pull in the same way. Not that you don't want partnership or don't want connection, but it doesn't feel as maybe compulsive or
Yeah, it's
as
more
need.
choiceful.
Choiceful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's more choiceful.
That sounds like life's a little easier
Yeah.
in one
Yeah.
way.
I mean, to really be transparent, I've now been with my current dear partner for a year, but when I was dating, it was a horrible experience.
Like
It
you,
was exhilarating and horrible. It was a lot of things, but it's still a complicated thing for
like
me.
when you left the monastery and you were
Yeah.
dating. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Dating, I mean dating, we could maybe that's another podcast.
Sure.
The zen of dating.
You need to get someone else for that one.
Maybe you can interview him.
Right.
I've been partnered for 10 years. That was a long time ago
Okay,
for me.
okay, okay. Yeah. Oh, good. You're lucky. The world of dating apps. Anyways,
Yeah.
it's. I was doing a practice I learned from my paratheater teacher. A person who's really influential in my own spirituality is Antaro Ali,
Mm-hmm.
who happens to have lived in Portland now for a few years, and he developed something called paratheater, which is basically a practice of working with archetypal energies in a very embodied way.
Mm-hmm.
And he could see when I was in anima projections, even with women outside of the room. He saw it in my way of being.
Like when you were inhabiting a role or an energy in the theatrical performance quality, like
In
he
the
could tell what it
practice,
was an
he could
anima.
tell. Yes, he could tell. And one day he sent me his instructions for anima recovery ritual that
Oh,
he had done. He's kind of
oh,
clairvoyant.
yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
had used his own ritual for his own journey.
Yeah.
You gonna tell us about this one in case some of us need it, or is it a secret practice?
I mean, I could, if someone's interested, they could contact me.
Okay,
I'm
email
actually,
Jogen if you
yeah,
want.
yeah. I'm actually interested in helping facilitate this for men.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, how to describe the ritual? So it is a physical ritual you do, and you invite the energy of the feminine. First, you relate to it as external in
Mm-hmm.
an imaginal sense,
Yeah,
and
and I
then you
see you
invite.
moving there too, right? Like,
Yeah, because this
yeah.
is an embodied practice, although there are
Mm-hmm.
other ways to do it. So I built a shrine to the feminine.
Oh, what was on? Can I ask what was on your feminine shrine? If that's all right. You don't
Um,
have to share if you don't want. I'm just curious.
there was the image of a woman I was dating who was very painful.
Oh yeah.
There were flowers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite remember what else I had on there.
Yeah, yeah.
I might have had like a divine feminine, like a Tara image, something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm trying. Um, I always have. I can't. I shouldn't even say it if I can't think of the name. Diana, but the Greek equivalent.
Sophia?
No, no, no.
No.
Artemis.
Oh,
Artemis is
Artemis. Yeah.
it's just like that's a screwed up animus projection because anima projection because she's a like the virginal character.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Anyone that courts her gets killed.
Uh-huh. Right. Right. Yeah.
So anyway, that was a tangent. But you had this shrine set up and you do this sort of external kind of embodied movement.
Relating to the feminine. So you relate to the energy of the shrine, and you could take it even further. You might be able to have, if you have some affinity for the imaginal, like feel the presence of the feminine,
Mm-hmm.
and you move with it. And then the next part of the ritual is you invite it into your body.
Mm.
And we did a lot of work like this in paratheater, but you feel the feminine in your own body, which is there,
Yes.
and you let it animate you,
Yeah. Which can be scary in
which
my
can be very
experience.
scary. Yeah.
Like, whoa, my body's moving in ways that like I don't move this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are thousands of men who wouldn't go anywhere near ecstatic dance,
Yeah.
right?
Or
Because
they masculinely dance the
that's
ecstatic.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I find so much of this my own experience, like hips are so present, at least in the embodied
Mhm.
sense,
Yeah.
and like a circular quality. And
Yeah.
that might just be my own sort of reclamation process, but
I relate to that.
yeah.
Hips. Yeah. So this ritual, it was powerful for me. I did it twice. And this was now about 4 years ago. I did this ritual, and I feel like it really shifted something.
Yeah.
And the idea is that when you recover your projections on the feminine, your relationship with it is more free and more clear. And women benefit from that,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about, like, so if we're kind of using the anima framework here,
Mm-hmm.
this is reclaiming the inner feminine in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, I think there's a flip side to this of reclaiming or working with the inner masculine.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a bit, because that's actually where I find more struggle myself.
No,
Like,
I
not that the
agree.
feminine's easy, but I think sometimes it's easier for me to kind of get low and get sort of in the body, but then to be like firm and angry or to hold a line
Yeah.
is much more of a challenge for me personally.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah. No,
wondering,
I
like,
resonate with that. I think that's true for me as well.
yeah, I mean, maybe we have a similarity, kind of being raised by our mothers and
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the Zen training was a place I feel like it's a pretty masculine spiritual
It's pretty
tradition.
masculine.
It's pretty masculine. Yeah. 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 And
Like, you get there
historically,
on time, you sit still, you
yes.
don't move, you follow the schedule.
Yeah, I had a Zen Roshi scold me for weeping once.
Oh no! Wait,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. This was a Japanese
Oh,
person, which
I'm
is
not.
a culture that is even more leans towards patriarchy than where we're at in North America.
Yeah, and that's part of Zen too, right? This sort of transmission from a
Yeah.
patriarchal society,
Yeah.
and then coming here and still keeping some of that, but then being modified and like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you found that Zen was a place for you where you could reclaim some of the masculine or work with these
I
masculine
think I
energy.
did. Uh-huh. Because what I found in that situation, and it was different things at different stages in my training, is I had to face fears and step into challenges and hold boundaries in myself and with working with people that outside of that situation, I don't think I would have had that experience.
Hmm.
It was almost like there were rites of passage and threshold experiences that the tradition helped me step into.
Yeah. If you think back there, do some sort of stand out in your mind? Maybe not the specifics of it, but
Mm-hmm.
the sort of archetypal or the essence quality of it.
Yeah. Well, we do, as you know, we do a style of meditation retreat called sesshin.
Mm-hmm.
And the essence of sesshin is you are in a crucible where you sit with yourself for hours and hours and you have no choice.
Yeah.
There's no choice. And I think a certain stability, first of all, develops from that, which you might call masculine, or an ability to just stay in a kind of fierce presence with what is, with what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And you're alone.
Hmm.
You're alone. You're doing this aloneness with other
Yeah,
people.
it's paradoxically alone because
It's
you're surrounded
paradoxically
by
alone.
everyone else alone
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, learning to hold space for myself
Yeah.
uh, in that way without any escape hatches
Yeah.
is one
And you're
thing.
speaking of bravery here in a way,
Bravery, courage. Yeah.
willingness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Willingness. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's
As
some
I,
quality. I'm just relating as we're talking.
yeah,
I'm like flashing back on sashins, but like, you hold a posture, right? The posture is very important in a way.
yeah,
But inside, you could be like a little kid weeping. But if you like look at look outward, right? You're
yeah,
upright, you're holding yourself. But like, I've had many moments just like, oh, like, this is horrible. Like, when is it gonna end? Like, please ring the bell. How much longer? But
yeah,
like,
yeah,
if anyone saw, I just kind of was very still and my eyes were straightforward. But like, the inner sound was like, ah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that that seems like a masculine training to me in a way of sort of warriorship and kind of,
Warriorship. That's a great word. Yeah, warriorship.
yeah.
Hmm. I found I had a terrible fear of public speaking. Now
Mm,
the irony is that's what I do for a living, more or less. I talk to groups and to people, and I had to face it. I mean, terrible fear of it, like armpits dripping if I got called on to speak, even in a group that I knew of
yeah.
people I knew.
Yeah, and that's part of ceremony and a part of some of the rituals and practices of your community, right? You have to talk at certain points.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a
Yeah.
rite of passage called the shuso, which is like the head trainee, and you have to get up in front of the community and you're tested.
Yeah, everyone asks you a question,
Everyone
right?
asks you a
Everyone that
question, and
chooses to.
yeah, and you're responding spontaneously as best you can, and
Yeah.
And Hogan would call on me all the time to speak in front of people. And I remember one time I was sitting down and he asked me to speak, and I was nervous. And he said, "Jogan, why don't you stand up?" Because he knew that when I was in the meditation posture, I could lean on a space of meditation more.
Mm.
And so he invited me to like expose myself and really inhabit that anxiety, but still do what I needed to do in that moment.
Yeah. That sounds so beautiful. And like maybe a part of, I don't know if it's a part of masculine, but like the anxiety, the fear, that doubt,
Yeah,
and showing up.
yeah, yeah,
And- Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think we could make a nice distinction between fearlessness and courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a kind of Aristotelian quote there, right? Like courage is showing up with fear or something like that. I forget what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh. So, but like, so I had this experience when I was doing like decolonial training, like in decolonization.
Mm-hmm,
And it was this really beautiful practice where you put stones around you,
mm-hmm,
and they're representative of different identities, like masculinity, sexuality, religion. And you kind of place them, you pick the stones and you place them sort of intuitively.
mm-hmm,
And then you move between the stones and see how the other ones are affected. And I had this experience of moving on to religion, which like is and was Zen for me at the time.
mm-hmm,
And masculinity changed.
mm-hmm,
That like when I was in a Zen context, I was way more comfortable with masculinity for myself. Like I could be
mm-hmm.
quiet, I could be blunt, not like blunt in a mean way, but just like there's a no nonsense in Zen sometimes. Like, where is
Yeah.
it at? It's there. Like
Uh-huh.
it's not like,
Yeah.
oh, let me help you find it. Like, are you okay? It's just like it's right there. Or like,
Direct.
yeah, like I'm doing my job, you do your job. Like that's what
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
So and it was like so, and I was like, oh, it was really shocking to see that, like, oh, I'm so much more comfortable with masculine in this sacred context. But
Mm-hmm.
then you put me in like the everyday whatever outside of that container, like I transform my masculinity, I sort of dampen it or soften it to kind of
Mm-hmm.
move through this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's something there for you, if you found that sort of in being spending a lot of time in the monastic space and then now
Mm-hmm.
being out of it, and how masculinity feels similarly or differently for you.
Hmm. That's a really interesting example you gave. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the question, partially because fluidity of identity is something that's really meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I study that from two different angles, from Zen, where you train in fluidity of identity and deconstructing who you think you are,
Mm-hmm.
down to the ultimate mystery of you can't say anything about it.
Yeah, like it's so fluid, it's not a thing.
Yeah, yeah, nice, yeah. And then through the paratheater work and the voice dialogue, where you learn to move between different parts of yourself with the kind of ease. And
Yeah.
so I don't even know where to start with that. I
Uh,
mean, what first came up with me is I was thinking back when I first started working with my female students.
mm-hmm.
And I remember one young woman had trauma, self identified. And I found that I would just instinctively modulate what we're calling masculinity in order for her to feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't sort of like you read in a book that you should kind of be a certain
No,
way.
no, isn't it instinctive?
Yeah. But you
Right. And then
modulated that.
I'd modulate it. And then, someone would walk in like, an arrogant young 20-year-old guy, and I would just kind of get fierce again because that's the energy I needed to meet.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's one of the blessings of the training is we learn to just be that kind of responsive to the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, my girlfriend says, "You're not really that masculine. You're actually feminine. You're a very feminine man."
Yeah.
So I don't know. Outside of that context of being a teacher, I don't know how I modulate my masculinity.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm still sort of like stuck a bit on like the integrating and reclaiming of masculine energies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'm just trying to sit with like anger and sexuality
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even agency. Like
Uh-huh.
these are sort of three domains that can be challenging for folks to integrate,
Mm-hmm.
whatever their gender identification is.
Mm-hmm.
And you spoke to this beautiful ritual of I saw it as like courting the feminine and then inviting it into the body.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, what, what what's the same thing for the animus, if we're going to stay in that language of how to work with those energies? Like, how do we work with anger, work with agency, right? The
Yeah.
willingness to create and to assert and to decide that, like, this is what I'm going to do
Yeah. Yeah.
outside of, for us that aren't in the Zen temple on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll share my thoughts on it. I'm really interested in yours
That's,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
please.
So let me start with agency. I think everybody has desires, and there are desires, if we really discern, that get closer to our heart, and there are
Hmm.
desires that are actually further away. And there's different ways to discern, like, what do I truly care about?
Yes.
What am I really living for?
Yeah.
What really matters to me?
Yeah.
Okay. If you weren't trying to impress anybody, if you weren't trying to please your parents or society, what really matters to me?
Yeah.
So there's some like work we can do around that kind of investigation, peeling off the layers.
I love this as you say it. This is, my heart's just very happy right now of
Oh,
this.
okay, yeah,
Yeah, especially the
yeah,
layers and
yeah,
like the conditioned sort of expressions of what we think we want, and as it gets
yeah,
closer and closer, and yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think the desires that are in the depth of our heart are utterly trustworthy.
Hmm.
I think they're utterly trustworthy. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just thinking about what you were talking about with 20-year-old boys, like still call them boys. I mean, and this sort of struggle in being in the feeling body,
Mm-hmm.
which sometimes is the heart too, right? Like, not that
Right.
it's totally one, but like if we're not in our feeling body or embodied in our just the body, that we're maybe not going to be able to hear that heart or work with that.
It may take some training.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was why my eyes darted a little
Yeah.
as you.
Yeah. Yeah. So where I want to connect with the desire and agency is once you know what you really care about,
Mhm.
then it's easier to do what you want to do.
Hmm.
But we have to work with doubt. We have to work with fear of success. We have to work with the energy in us that wants to please other people. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is everyone has this force of positive force of agency. And what I have found helped me, and I think helps others, is working with what are the obstacles to that? Who's in the way
Hmm.
of this natural doing of what your heart really wants to see done?
That the heart calling is inherent in a way,
Yeah.
and it's blocked. So it's
And
not
it's
necessarily
blocked.
creating that desire, or even it's making room for it to express in our lives.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Here's the problem with all this kind of thinking, though. Then people start to think, oh, I'm supposed to have some grand purpose in life.
Yeah, yeah. Like, what am I gonna cure, or what am I gonna solve or create?
Yeah,
How
I'm
will
supposed
I
to be
change the world?
passionate. I'm going to find my purpose and be passionate.
Yeah.
And we think that somebody out there is so passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tricky thing about this. You may find that your agency is around something simple, very simple. It may not be some grand, bold thrusting yourself onto the world stage.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter if you really clarify like the native desires of your heart. I don't think it matters. You won't at that point it won't matter to you.
Yeah, because the stage is such a part of our culture, right? Like, we're such a stage, or like Instagram. I mean, we're on a stage right now. It's just me and you, but this
Right,
will be
right, right,
posted somewhere.
right.
And like, oh, how to, and that, like, how that can get infused with the heart calling, right? We assume it has to take a stage like, or a grand
Yeah,
quality,
yeah,
but like maybe our heart desires something simple or something small,
yeah,
and like how to tease out these layers so that you
yeah.
can know where you're being influenced by the calling
Absolutely.
of the stage versus the, maybe like I really want to make a chair for myself, not for
Yeah.
Instagram, that I sit on and drink tea.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, something that I think that Buddhism, at least some traditions of Buddhism, bring in that can be really helpful here is the concept of bodhicitta.
Mm-hmm.
And bodhicitta is basically, may all beings flourish. It's this spirit. It's a stance of the heart. May all beings flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And the theory is that everybody has that in them too, because what we are spiritually is intimately connected. And so what we do is affecting others in subtle and not so subtle ways. And so once we make that conscious, may my life be an offering for all beings. And that could be my community, my family. It's just like when we turn it away from a narcissistic, what do I want to do, to I'm embedded in a system that I affect, an energy comes, right? An energy comes forward that helps agency, because self centeredness hinders the flow of energy in us.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
That,
we turn outward and we're like, I'm making this chair for the benefit of all beings. Doesn't mean I have to sell them. Doesn't mean that, I have to
mm-hmm.
invite people over to sit it. But somehow this is my offering to the world. It it opens up energy. And there was a metaphor. I think Shantideva used it. He said, if you want to open a small tea shop just to serve a few people, um, it'll have a very different effect if you say, I want to serve, the whole city. So there's something about an expansive vision of how we want our life to be offered that brings in a lot of energy and lends more meaning anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that I feel helps agency be sustained. Self centeredness is draining.
Yeah. Yeah, I love there's like two layers here as you talk that really resonate for me. Like one is you're just saying, right, that this sort of altruistic, if we're going to use more modern language, kind of quality of humanness, that we are altruistically wired, if we want to go there. I don't really go there that
Yeah,
often.
yeah.
But
Okay.
this bodhicitta calling, like, it supports our agency because it gives meaning, and it's for others. So there's
Yeah.
all these other people here that matter in my agency.
Yeah.
And like that's really beautiful to me, because I know for me my calling sometimes they're overwhelming at times, or I'm scared. Like
Mm-hmm.
even this as I'm talking to you, right, I'm a little
Mm-hmm.
like, God, what the fuck am I doing?
I love your transparency.
Yeah, so, and it's like a work for me just to sit here and like show up. um but there's this other piece in there too for me around trust, right? That like I hear that as you're talking, that like I'm gonna listen and learn to hear this inner kind of calling, or maybe it's not even a calling that gives such heroic meaning to it, but
It
like,
can, yeah.
yeah, but just this inner voice that kind of is clear, and that if I follow that, that it is maybe part of the larger scheme, part of the greater offering.
Yeah.
And like that's can be so scary, I think, to like, oh, it's just like it using the same, it's just building a chair. But look at the world, right? Like the world's fucked, and I'm just gonna build a chair.
Mm-hmm. You bring up an interesting issue. And I can't say I've resolved that, because as we were saying, this doesn't have to be grandiose.
Yeah.
The the Buddhists are biased around bodhicitta,
Mm-hmm.
because they basically feel like the most generous thing you can do for the world is clarify your own shit.
Mm-hmm.
Deal with your own greed, anger, and ignorance. And if you do that, the impact you make on the world is going to be very valuable, because you are the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're biased. That's the main thing about bodhicitta. Yes, be generous, but if the work you're doing in the world is transforming you to be a more authentic, true to your own values, kind human being, then that's the deepest offering you can make.
Yeah. And I think you were in a challenge that view of it there earlier. Or...
Well, I just don't, I won't take that as a dogma or an ultimate truth.
yeah, yeah. Like you hold that. That's important to you, but you don't know if that is actually the best. I don't know the best, but like a and stumble and
I
help me.
think you can't help but if you act, if you discern what you really really care about and you act on that, it can't help but be an offering. It can't help
Mm,
but be beneficial. You know,
yeah.
it, that kind of view of bodhicitta kind of makes it sound like people who are therapists and meditation teachers are like the best people because they're doing like the best thing. But
Well,
I don't think
we're
it's
not
like that.
always clear of greed, anger, and delusion as we
For
do
sure.
therapy.
For sure we're not. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's my spiel about agency at this moment. You know,
Yeah,
there's
thank you for that. I love that spiel. And
I rely on bodhicitta to find energy to show up
hmm
when other parts of me want to go back to sleep.
yeah. Yeah, can we hang out with that a bit? I had an experience a little while ago doing a ceremony. It was like a combo ceremony. It's like where you
I've
get
heard of that.
yeah, frog poison, and it's not a psychedelic, but it's really intense. And like in the quality of the experience, you know, is a bit animated and personified. Like I felt challenged by that medicine to see my desire to be of benefit for the earth, right? Like the earth is very important to me,
Mm-hmm.
and then my fear and my wanting to kind of like turn away from that. And
Yeah.
it just showed me that, you know, like look at like
Yeah.
here's one thing and here's another thing. Like
Yeah.
what are you going to do with this?
Yeah.
And I feel you hearing that on saying that on some level that like this these bodhicitta callings, right? Like sometimes parts of us don't are scared or maybe even selfish and they don't want to kind of give up their own stuff. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but can you
Anybody who
hang out with
denies that is not honest.
yeah,
Yeah.
how do you work with that? I mean, as someone that seems to really care about doing the work for yourself and others, like well, how do you work with the parts that are scared or selfish or want to sleep, like
Mm-hmm.
to honor the bodhicitta calling?
Yeah. Well, I used to ignore them. I thought that was what I was supposed to do in Zen.
Did you have a good strategy for ignoring them? Was it just like shh, quiet, or
I just got good at meditating.
yeah, like well, you meditated. I mean, that was your bodhicitta calling for a while, right? You just
Yeah,
lived in a monastery, and like that was.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm learning more and more to say, "Oh, sweetheart.
Yes.
Oh, I hear you. I
Yeah.
feel you're scared.
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's like we're adults doing these adult things, but these younger parts of ourselves that are some of them are frozen in time, they're here too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more and more a reality for me.
Yeah. Of engaging and working with these parts that
Yeah.
are scared or
Hmm.
um, feel the callings you have or the ways you want to be in the world are maybe too much for them or.
Overwhelmed. Like,
Uh,
I think in the past, I'd show up to give a Dharma talk, and this little boy was there who was so afraid that people were going to like say he was dumb or something.
oh.
And what I did in those days is I just practiced equanimity.
Mm-hmm.
So what that meant is that my heart was racing and sweat was going down my armpits, but I was leaning into a meditative capacity to not freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I'm interested in making that part of me feel safe.
Yeah, and you even touch your heart when you say that.
Yeah, because he kind of lives there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. And like there's this sort of as you talk about this, right? This tending to the parts, being with the parts. And I think sometimes maybe there's like a masculine, feminine way of doing that.
Hmm.
Like as you spoke there, that felt sort of feminine to me. I hate saying these words all the time. I never use these words in my daily
Yeah.
life that much.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, right? These
Yeah.
don't come out of my mouth that often. But we're here and we're doing it.
Right. Right.
But like this sort of receiving, like, oh, like you're scared. Like, let me hold you. What's going
Mm-hmm.
on as one mode. And then you describe this other masculine mode of equanimity, right? Of just
Mm-hmm.
silencing out. Like, okay, you're there, but I'm ignoring you and I can be chill right now. And then I can
Mm-hmm.
do my Dharma talk.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious about this other possibility too of like, how do we engage those parts and bring them along?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, like, yeah, I know you're scared, but we're sitting here and I gotta give this talk.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you like hear this place I'm trying to touch
Mm-hmm.
on? Is it
Yeah.
I don't know if it's valid or not, the place I'm touching, but
It's an interesting exploration. What comes to mind is if we take as a relative truth that the psyche contains these different parts and we live with
hmm
multitudes inside, that means the little boy is never going to not be the little boy.
yeah, you can't like turn the little boy into the heroic kind of warrior.
Nope. You're
Yeah.
not going to say man up to the little boy. I mean, if
hmm
you do, you're gonna get the effect of telling the little boy to man up.
Yeah.
So I think I think the what we can do is the more we show up, including the whole of ourself, the safer those parts of us feel,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they don't they can just be here, but be kind of tucked away,
Yeah.
be nestled appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, you're reminding me of work I've done in the past, kind of parts work in more gestalt settings around what these parts need.
Mm-hmm.
Like me kind of being the taking the voice of the autonomous self, or like the I, right? Like, hey, I'm doing this. Like, we're gonna do this. And then being the small boy, like, I don't want to. Like, I'm scared. Like, don't make me fucking do this, please.
Uh-huh.
Or like, I won't do it, right? A little tyrannical boy sometimes.
Yeah.
And then like going through the debate of like, well, it's like, what do you need if I do this? And sometimes I feel the parts say something like, I need you to not ignore me and
Yeah.
like hide me away to go do this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. You said that. I discovered that for a while I thought I wasn't supposed to have my vulnerability present in my Dharma teaching.
Oh, like they were separate sort of
They were
endeavors.
separate because, especially the Japanese teachers, a lot of them they would never bring their own emotions or their own self into the teaching.
Mm-hmm.
It's impersonal or transpersonal, meaning it's like
And that's
just
their aim in ways is to embody that, right? And
embody
present
that and
that.
resonate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I found is that at a certain point, I invited my little boy was part of the talks
Oh, yeah.
in a way that I would just like speak more from that tender place or talk about things that I liked. And I was giving voice to how he felt and how he saw, or the way I engaged with people. You know, I'd look at people differently and that kind
Mm.
of thing. And that changed everything about the talks. When I included him in that way, he relaxed.
Yeah.
And I felt more real doing those talks. It felt like I was presenting a more holistic version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I love hearing that. This sort of inviting these parts along, and not just sort of like getting them to do what we like, sort of like subtly getting them to do what we want. Like, oh wait, I really want to give a Dharma talk. Like, what do you need to not be so annoying right now? Well, like, hey, do you want to give a Dharma talk too? Like, what do you want to talk about? Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah. Um, um, hmm. Just thinking as we're here. So one of the things that I like, more in the therapeutic realm for me, and just in life, but like, and we touched on this earlier, the disconnection from emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And like a part of my training is a Reichian psychotherapist, like somatics
Okay.
work,
Mm-hmm.
and like the literal like muscular process of cutting off emotion from the face.
Mm.
But like we can't, like my therapist will, it's almost like theater training. Like
Uh-huh.
he'll just I'll be laying down, right? We do some breath exercises to activate the body.
Uh-huh.
And then he'll be like, okay, give me the excited face.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, again,
Hmm.
again, and like 30 times. And then he'll point to like a little corner in my eye. He's like, what about right there? Like, there's what's going on there? Are you excited there or not? Can you be excited there?
Wow.
And it's sort of like reanimating the face to show our embodiment.
Uh-huh.
And I'm curious for you, like your own journey, like you identified, it sounded like, with those 20-year-old young men who are cut off and stoically doing the Zen thing. Like, what was your journey for you of reconnecting to emotions, and then also maybe letting those emotions be visible and be known?
Uh-huh. Wow. I'm It's inspired by that practice. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a reason why we disconnect from emotion is because we know that it's going to be a lot to really inhabit it.
Mm.
We're going to have to feel deeply, and it may not be pleasant. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, that was true. Like the trauma of my loss of my father, I had some pretty strong chronic sickness from not digesting that.
Mm. And you felt that gastrointestinally in a
Yes.
way? Yeah.
Yeah. Did I tell you that?
No, I just am assuming.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah. Well, I did say digest.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I had
But
some.
trained ear for these things.
Yeah. No. Nice. I appreciate that. Um, I had severe IBS,
Oh, yeah.
and in hindsight, I see that it was undigested emotion. It was emotion I could not inhabit before I had my training as a Zen student, and
And was that a part of your process there of having to go back and work with some of that grief and what happened around the loss of your father at that age?
well, in a way, yes, but it was indirect because you can't sit in that meditation posture, and there's this emphasis on being upright.
I've never
And
been
my
very good at that.
my posture before that, I was kind of like collapsed a little bit
Hmm.
from all the sorrow and the guardedness that I held, and so
Yeah.
there's this bodily training, and that unlocks things.
Oh, like just the inherent, like, I'm not gonna say force, but like posturing the body opens these energies to move through the body.
Yeah, it's that plus wakefulness.
Like bringing the bright attention to the experience.
Exactly, and you do that for hours and hours, and it's like it's gonna just heat up, what's frozen, and it's gonna thaw things. And I imagine this is fairly common for people who start to meditate more regularly or intensively. That stuff starts to thaw,
Hmm.
and that definitely happened for me. And
Were you aware of the content that was thawing, or was it more just this sort of soup of feeling tension, struggle, constriction that was opening up?
yeah, sometimes I was aware of the content.
Yeah.
I remember writing poems about my mother and just like things
Oh.
that happened to me in childhood, and strong memories would come up. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I was just feeling the contractions or the grief that was basically a mystery for a long time.
Mm.
And it's actually harder when you don't know what it is.
Yeah, right. I think
Yeah.
about that a lot. Like even today, I mean, I was a little bit glad, but I woke up so irritated today.
Uh-huh.
And I can be irritable at times, but it was like, and it had an explosive quality. Like I felt like I was going to explode.
Yeah.
And if I would sit, it would kind of quiet and be more of this energy I could be with. But
Yeah.
and I had no idea why. I'm like, what the fuck? And it just happens every few weeks where I'm just like irritable and kind of want to explode. And
Yeah.
like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I get. Yeah. Totally.
Especially with COVID, I'm like, my normal coping mechanisms are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I snapped at my girlfriend this morning very
Oh,
strongly. It scared her.
yeah.
This burst of anger. No clue what it was about. I mean, there's something she did I didn't particularly like, but the what she was doing and the response were
Oh.
so far apart. So it's just like,
And they also sounded really close too, that they happened fast.
yeah, yes, stimulus and response were very close too.
Yeah. I woke
Yeah.
up this morning telling my partner we were divorced for the day. Like, I just want to be divorced for today. All right.
I love that.
I'm like too mad to even pretend to be in relationship with you right now. I
Yeah.
wasn't even mad at her.
Right.
And this feels like a playful segue, kind of in like irritability and anger and
Yeah. Yeah.
like those often being emotions that are associated with masculinity, although that
Yep.
I think is not accurate. And like I did want to name this. I've seen one thing that I find interesting, that there's this cliche around men only being able to be angry. That
Only
all,
being able to be.
yeah, they're like that's the sort of the emotion that's open, and all the other emotions get funneled through anger. And
Uh-huh.
maybe that was true in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, but I see a lot of more people my age, maybe like as you're saying, Gen Xers, millennials,
Hmm.
that have really cut off from anger. Like they
Uh-huh.
they saw
Yeah.
that, right? They saw their dads just
Yeah.
like waking up in the morning snapping.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And then it's pushed away, but then They don't like, they're like, well, I'm not an angry person. And it's like, well, I think you are. But I just don't think you know how to do it.
Yeah.
So, like, could you share for you around like irritability, anger, and any advice, even as today we were two people that struggled with it, or like how you see it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I resonate with being cut off from it.
Yeah.
And I had a stepfather who was violent,
Oh.
and so I saw that, and I was afraid of that. And
Did he direct it to you, or were you witnessing it?
verbally,
Oh,
verbally, I didn't ever receive physical violence from him, but my sister did a little bit.
oh, yeah. Sorry,
So,
I'm getting angry now.
yeah, right, right. It rises up. What's that about?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I came up to share is practices of reclaiming it
Mm-hmm.
that I could share.
Please.
That's
I
part
need
of the
I
Zen
need those
tradition.
today.
Yeah. Uh, um, Using anger, but you're kind of transmuting it into ferocious energy, is a part of some systems of Zen training.
Yeah, I don't think I got this in training. Can you tell me about it?
Well, there's a practice, a koan practice of working with something called mu.
Oh yeah, kind of sometimes the first practice that's given.
Sometimes the first koan, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're working on that, working with that in your meditation, but when you meet with the teacher, you are offering your most robust and intense expression of that gathered energy
That
from
gets
working on mu.
consolidated and expressed through that word of mu that you
Yeah.
put your whole
And
self
you kind
into.
of tone it when you express it in the context of the private meeting.
Yeah. And
You
for like
like,
folks listening, right? Like koans are a practice, and then there's a bunch of them, and it's almost like a test or a riddle you get given. These are not the right words, I know, but
no,
like,
no, sorry, that's not right.
yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, wait, you give the context of koans.
Koans are these super devoted teachers and students of the past gave a verbal, encapsulated their awakening in a verbal, like a capsule of light,
Hmm.
because they put it into words. And you can swallow that capsule of light to get a hit of the same experience and perspective that they had.
And
And
there's a
each of them are
process of
different.
working with the swallowing, but
Yeah.
you work with it in a
Yeah.
sort of digestive process of either
Yeah.
repeating it or sitting with it or
There are
embodying
different
it.
ways. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. I'm so
Yeah.
glad I got that wrong. Thank you for that
That's
definition.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a strange and unique and amazing and very difficult form of spiritual practice, but it's amazing for those who have the affinity.
And then you express it in the one-on-one meeting with the teacher. You show the light that you've swallowed in a way.
Yeah, and every koan is different. They have different forms, but in most lineages, you do that in a very dynamic way.
Hmm.
And so, what that means is that you're drawing on all your emotional energy and you're just putting it in a different valence. So, anger and ferocity and anger and presence are so intimately related that when anger is like this intensity, it can be boundary energy, it can be outwardly directed energy. But when you drop out the directionality from it,
Hmm.
put it this way: when you drop the object out of anger,
Yeah.
you're left with fierce presence.
Mm. And
That's part
sometimes
of
it's
what.
like hot, or it's hard to
Absolutely,
stay in that presence even without the object.
absolutely. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I can do it all the time.
Yeah.
It means, first of all, that you know how to drop the object, which means you get angry and you think it's about that someone,
Hmm.
right? And of course, sometimes people are harmed, but a lot of times it's really we're just blaming somebody.
Hmm.
In that moment, you have to drop the thought of she fucking did whatever, he
Hmm.
did XYZ. You have to drop that and just let that energy float in your body mind with no outlet. And then you just suffuse that with wakefulness, and it becomes that wakefulness, but it becomes ferocious wakefulness. That's you when you see those Tibetan deities with flames and like
Yeah,
fangs.
the
That's what
sort
we're
of
talking
wrathful
about there.
protectors.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's part of the territory.
Yeah. And but when you say this, right, it feels close to bypassing in a way. Not that you are saying that, but right, that there can, like, maybe we think we're like, oh, I'm working with my anger, right? I dropped the object, I'm not thinking about it now, and Look at I'm good. Like
It's such an important point. Yeah.
how do you hold that though, right? Like not bypassing the person who is offended or hurt or angry or all
Mm-hmm.
those parts inside.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of my current thoughts about this is everybody spiritual bypasses.
Yeah.
It's not something you can read a book about and take a workshop and like decide and think you're not going to do
Like I don't
because
bypass now. Look at that. I did the
right,
things.
right, right. It's part of the process because the transcendent is a truth. There is in the course of spiritual practice, we do come to touch an aspect of us that is just shining presence, free of all
Mm.
confusion and reactivity.
Oh man, I feel you're saying something pretty nuanced here. And I want to see if I'm grokking it a bit.
Okay.
Like we all bypass in a way. I think you're also saying that like there is an aspect of our experience that is beyond, that
Yeah.
is not defined,
Yep.
and that is available, and we can touch that. Or please go from there.
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
to say more words.
Nicely said. We can touch it, and we do. And in a sense, it's the most true thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so then what we do is we start to identify with that,
Yeah, that
and
yeah.
the rest is seen as just the human mess.
Yeah, and that can be these sort of traditions, right, of denying the body or denying kind of
Yeah.
sexuality, right, that
Yeah.
like just that supreme godhead experience, whatever you want to call it, like that's the real deal, and then all of this is just messy details you don't need to deal with.
They believe, my experience in these traditions is they believe if you fully realize that everything else will just resolve itself.
Oh, there'll be no more kinks and no more issues as long
Yeah.
as you're fully embedded within the divine. Or
If you really sever the root of the ego and see its nature to the bottom, there'll be no more basis for reactivity.
what you think
Or
about that?
I think it's an interesting theory.
You still working on it? What do you
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know exactly where I'm going. I want to talk about a practice in Dzogchen that I did.
Oh yeah, go please.
We still have time for the anger thing?
Yeah, we got it's like 4:55 right now, so
Okay. Okay. Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Um, the most potent thing for me was basically a practice that is awareness
Mm-hmm.
plus catharsis.
That's and this is a unifying thing you're saying. Please go,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah. So Buddhists basically don't believe in catharsis.
They don't. I've cried so much on a cushion. I guess I'm doing it wrong.
Here's what I mean by that. I don't mean there's not release, but what I mean by that is if you do something outside of awareness, you deepen the tendency that you're going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think you're going to go and like punch a pillow with rage and that you're going to get it out, what you may not be understanding is that the mechanism that is giving rise to that anger is still operating in your mind. It's not like there's this bucket that you can empty in you.
Yeah. And like this is expressed in kind of modern psychoanalytic thinking, right? The insight does not necessarily breed change. That
Okay.
like you can understand it, but you're not getting to the root of it. You can like cry and let it out, but you haven't touched
Yeah.
the germinating point where the anger arises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which in the spiritual traditions is awareness shining through the patterns
Mm-hmm.
in the mind and body that lead to those actions.
Yeah. And there's this Dzogchen practice.
There's this Dzogchen practice that, well, first of all, this is an amazing practice. Basically, what you do is you go out into the wilderness, you
Mm-hmm.
strip naked,
What I'm getting more excited as we go. This is great.
and kids, don't try this at home. You need guidance with this. It's serious
Oh,
stuff,
okay.
and there's you ritually give full expression to the whole range of emotion until you collapse from exhaustion.
Mm. This sounds so shamanic or sort of not necessarily, but like,
It
yeah,
may have shamanic
like
roots.
trance work in it almost. Yeah.
Well, so they use the mythic framework of like the six realms of existence. So
Mm-hmm.
you would embody the hell realm.
Mm-hmm.
So you're moving from sitting meditation in a space of a robust presence.
Mm-hmm.
You get up and you move in, and with your whole body, speech, and mind, you're giving voice to the hell realm. You're giving expression as intensely as you can, to the point that you have to collapse because you're so tired.
Mm. You
When
exhaust
you,
the hell realm.
well, here's the thing. Then that energy is up, right, in your system, and then when you collapse, you fall down and you do what's called sky gazing, and you
Mm.
rest in essential, pure, clear awareness.
And then you
And
move through these six realms, kind of doing this practice.
yeah.
Yeah, which like the hungry ghost realm and all
Mm-hmm.
the Deva
Mm-hmm.
realms.
Yeah.
What do you do in the human realm?
Um, what did I do in the human realm? So it's improv. There's different
Y-
ways they do it. Sometimes it's ritual actions you do, and sometimes it's improv. Um, I don't remember the human realm. That's really interesting. I might have done. The human realm is associated with excessive conceptuality. So you're thinking too much. You're worrying and thinking.
Sort of like a pacing kind of in circles
Yeah.
quality.
Uh-huh. It's a place of anxiety. Yeah.
Oh, that explains so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, in this practice, you basically come to experience emotions as a play of energy,
Mm.
because the play and the actuality lose their distinction in the
Mm-hmm.
space of awareness, and so
Mm.
your relationship to them changes. Yeah, I could say more about that. I
Well,
realize
yeah,
I might
no,
be
well, let me
getting a little
ask a
bit too.
more, let me ground a bit, like,
Thank
because
you.
this was about anger and working with anger.
Yeah.
What did you find through this practice in the transformation or engagement with anger?
Uh-huh. I found that, first of all, external displays of anger, I had a judgment about them I didn't know
Mm,
was there.
like when you embodied one of these angry realms and kind of had to display it alone, you saw something in your reaction to it.
No, in the midst of it, I was just kind of in the midst of it.
Oh, that's great.
After it,
Oh.
I saw by its absence that I used to have a judgment that I wasn't conscious of around anger, because when people who were, I would call angry before, I would see them, I would be critical
Mm,
because it
mm-hmm,
was in my shadow.
mm-hmm.
And then what had shifted was, oh, that's just what it is. It's just a display of energy.
I love this way you're describing sort of change here. That, like, if I'm hearing it right,
Mm-hmm.
you found yourself no longer critical of people displaying anger after this, and then saw that there was criticality there through that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool. You didn't have to try it; it just fell away, and you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
there was something there to know about."
Yeah. Right. Because I would encounter the same person. And my relationship, I came back from this retreat. I was in Mexico. I did this retreat. It was a long retreat. I came back, and the people who carried that, who I used to always have friction around, it was fine. Like some friction that was there was just not there.
Yeah, this sounds like such a beautiful practice in a way, like kind of trying to find a mandala of emotional energy experience, and then
Yeah.
moving through all of it. Like, we're gonna have shadow in one of these realms or all of them,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then it sounds like you just get to work through the whole realm in a way.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool. But you say don't do this on your own.
Well, I'm actually motivated to present it in some way that people can do.
Yeah.
Um, the way I'm describing it, you really want to have somebody who's done it before who can help hold you, because a lot of stuff can come up.
And is that person there witnessing? Or are they like at a distance? Like,
They're
what's
on
this?
site. They're on
They're on
site,
site.
and you
Yeah.
and you come together for a teaching every day, and they feed you instruction by instruction, but you have support, and so if you start to lose your shit, you can go like talk to the teacher.
Yeah. And is there an integration process after this? Like, after doing that dance?
It's a fun thing in Tantra and Dzogchen called Gana Chakra, which is basically you party. Yeah, you like, with your open mind, you have a little bit of alcohol and mead and whatever else, because you're not supposed to do that normally, but you
Hmm.
express your freedom by like partying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to practice at a Zen center where we got drunk after sessions.
Well, if
And they're
there's
like,
a Zen version.
they said it was tradition. And I've like read that in some places. And I always interpret it like, just don't make a big deal out of this. Like, you just get drunk, don't think about it.
Yeah.
Like, don't try to hold on. Like, wash it away.
These
Now,
things have their pluses and minuses.
but
Yeah.
then I did a retreat with you all, and it was like, do wholesome action. And then I did that. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot better.
Yeah, right.
So I don't get
Right.
drunk after retreats now.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I was gonna recommend like a way that you people can start
Mm-hmm.
to integrate this, and
Yeah,
it's
please.
well, we need to learn to be with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get a cognitive framework that emotion is not bad, and its arising does not mean I'm a bad person.
Yeah. These are so essential.
Easier said than done, right? I'm kind of just saying these things glibly, but this is not so simple.
What I've found for myself and see with others, the more you explore these as options, take them on as possibilities or whatever the right words are,
Mm-hmm.
you might see there's potential there. Like, oh yeah,
Uh-huh.
like maybe it's not bad, and you can lean into the more difficult one then.
Yeah.
Like when you have some taste of like, oh, this maybe this is trying to help me. This emotion,
Yeah.
this anger is trying to protect my boundary or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. So the ability to inhabit, to feel it, free of the judgment of it, so it can fully arise.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to let it arise and suffuse your consciousness.
Mm. This willingness to let it express and be present, and more than that
Yes,
in a way.
it's not so easy to explain,
Yeah.
because what you're doing is you have to, one needs to let go of the narrative and the images that were attached to the anger, or
Mm-hmm.
the sexuality for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
or the joy. Any emotion works.
Yeah.
So you're doing a little inner alchemy, and the way you do this is you sit, and once you find yourself in a stable presence, you connect with a memory that pisses you off or arouses you or excites you.
Mm-hmm.
So you invite the incident
Mm-hmm.
or the image.
So there's an
You,
initial phase of activating through image or
yeah,
memory, but
yeah,
then once the emotional vitality of it is expressed in the body, you drop the image or the
drop it.
memory.
Yep. And that's part of what makes it challenging. You have to let go of the associations,
Mm-hmm.
and then the energy, if you don't have any problem with it being there, can integrate into awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, each of these energies has a particular flavor, way it flavors awareness. Anger is associated with mirror-like clarity in the tantric tradition.
Mm.
You know how when you're angry, you really see the flaws in people kind of clearly?
Yeah, you can like, no, I know everything that's wrong with my wife when I'm
Yeah,
angry.
right. The essence of that is real
Mm.
crisp discrimination. There's like this mirror-like reflection that's very accurate,
Mm.
direct, sharp knowing. And that's part of what happens when anger is transmuted. We get this crisp awareness,
Mm.
and all the emotions have their gift in that way.
Yeah. So this process you're describing is similar to the type of work I do with folks, but it's different too. Like I listen to the struggle, right? People usually therapy, they're like bring their struggle in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I listen to it and then I try to activate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like because people talk about from a distance. So it's like how do we turn this on? And then so that the energy is in the body, but the piece that for me is important is what are you doing to that energy to not let it flow?
Yeah.
Like we all
Yeah.
have our sort of means and activities we engage in to repress, project, push away, just like all the ways we have.
Yeah.
And like is for the in these practices, is there working with the sort of the personal and how we uniquely like mess with the energy? I don't have a good word right now.
Yeah.
Our defensive structure.
That's a great phrase. Yeah. No, and there should be. The answer is no. Um, no, these traditions were deconstructive. They looked at like human being as like um, the elements. You kind of break down experience into elements, and
Hmm.
basically you're kind of saying this is just thought,
Yeah.
right? Just um, meeting things on the level of phenomena of just energy is the way that they deal with that. And I think what you're hitting on that's so important is that probably has never worked for everybody.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
theory's there, but it's probably never worked for everybody,
Yeah.
right? Because if someone has seen, for example, anger turn to violence, maybe they witnessed a murder or abuse, it's not so simple to say just feel your anger,
Yeah.
because they know the destructive power of letting anger really arise.
Yeah, and when you're talking, and I don't know Tibetan very well at all, like Tibetan Vajrayana practice, but you have this realm of deities, right? And the wrathful deities you alluded to, and then the kind of more equanimous deities or the loving deities, that they're these role models for these energies. And
Mm-hmm.
my sense is the practices are connected to those deities, that you actually have like embodiments of how to work with these energies. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's something we're missing so
Yeah.
much in our culture, is like,
Yeah.
what is healthy anger,
Yep.
so that you can kind of turn to that maybe when working with, like, oh, anger, like I shouldn't, like, oh wait, like that guy, he can do anger, maybe
Yeah.
like I can stay with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and maybe in those traditions, a skillful lama would have given someone the right deity to integrate the energy that they saw
mhm.
was difficult to inhabit.
And there's usually stories embedded, right, of how these energies have been helpful culturally, like how that deity has intervened to support something or
Yeah,
solve the problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh. And this is like something that's kind of important to me, is like the lack of role models in the masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I it often hurts me, personally and collectively. Like I feel it in myself. Like I've similarly sought male figures. I always feel a little bad. I don't work with female teachers. I'm like, how much of that is my sexism and how much
Mm-hmm.
is that is like I didn't have a dad. Like I really need
Mm-hmm.
some male energy and
Mm-hmm.
approval.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I even had like a therapeutic mushroom journey a little while ago, and was just feeling this, like I was like searching for a male role model in that space, just, and like going back through even the recent spiritual history of like how many men have done some pretty fucked up shit.
Yeah.
Even my one of my closer teachers ended up kind of uh falling to sexual misconduct, so it's like just
Mm-hmm.
something that I sit with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, I don't have a question here, I'm just more naming what seems like a problem.
Yeah.
This like lack of role models or lack of people embodying masculinity in a way that is generative, is uh doesn't seem fucked up. And I'm wondering if you can just speak for yourself.
I'll share something really personal. When I look at the world and the crisis we're faced with, something that I return to again and again is the deepest issue we have is misogyny.
Hmm.
The deepest issue we have is men's violent, aggressive, and disrespectful tendencies towards women.
Yeah.
I
And
think
towards
that
towards all life in a way, like
towards all life, and it's
women though too. I don't want to negate what you're
thank you.
saying
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I guess it's tying back to anger too. I feel like that male aggression is actually the root of racism. It's more fundamental than the construct of whiteness, for example. It's just this tendency to dominate and not be in relationship with one's own emotions, and therefore no relationship with the other's humanity.
Hmm. Yeah, like that this tendency of maleness to be cut off from our emotions may serve kind of the plethora of world problems we're seeing. That
You
like
can't
if we,
you
yes.
cannot be in touch with your emotions and oppress people.
Yeah. I interviewed a Reikian the other day and he said the exact same thing that you just said. You can't be
Yeah.
in touch with your emotions and keep a child in a cage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. When my community was going through processing the sort of misconduct by our teacher,
mhm,
I was really struggling with Zen.
mhm,
Like what's wrong with Zen? Because there's a lot of accounts of sort of misconduct in Zen. And the circle was holding that too. Like, is Zen broken? Should we even be doing this? And I was
mhm.
like trying to facilitate some of the group process.
Yeah.
And in that sort of more of a living koan, right? Like my own koan of masculinity there of like, what's going on here? It was like, oh man, no, the problem is men. It's not Zen.
Mm,
You know, it's a
mhm,
problem, right? That's dualistic, but like there, what
mhm,
you're saying, there's something here that is, it's hard to even look at.
mhm.
Yeah. How do you work with that? Like being a man and participating within maleness and then seeing maleness as maybe one of the roots of so much of what's plaguing kind of the environment and culture right now.
Yeah, this kind of toxic maleness we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I have to own up to is I often think I'm in a different category.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I alluded to earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
thought I was different.
Yeah. I'm just like, oh, there's that stereotypical man.
Yeah,
He's
the man.
he's interrupting his woman. He's got a big truck because he's got some kind of insecurity.
Mhm.
I got like my story is like, and I'm kind of conscious, you know.
Yeah, yeah, you've done your work. You don't have to
Right.
really be concerned about this.
No, we get my girlfriend on here. She'll tell you about my work.
Say what really happened this morning.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, before we had this interview planned, I had this like concern of I don't know what it means to be a man. How can I even talk to this?
I mean, I think that's something we're touching on, right? Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of representation right now that I mean, there's some. I don't want to cut off the men in the world that are trying and embodying their emotions and trying to
Hmm.
do whatever it is that we're supposed to be doing to not be so shitty, but
Hmm.
uh,
How much do we need this identity marker though?
yeah, the male, the man, the
How much? Yeah.
masculine.
How much? Why is this? Why is it necessary?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a position of privilege that has to be acknowledged,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think of my manness. Even if I see my penis, I'm like, oh, there's a penis, but I'm not like thinking I have that because I'm a man or
But from a critical theory perspective, right, that is the definition of privilege at times to not need to contemplate the identity.
exactly. Yes, I want to own that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're owning that right now.
Yeah, right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. I guess this inside the social context, it can't be in a mature way. You can't not wrestle with this identity of what it means to have the position of being male or identifying as male.
Yeah.
But I talked about this with my partner, and she says she doesn't think about being a woman unless she's around other men.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a concept like woman is not an identity that she consciously relates to, and I feel the same about for myself most of the time.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a dream I had once where I was sitting on like a high school bleachers, those like cement block sort of arena bleachers.
Uh huh.
And I was sitting with I thought it was a woman. No, at first I thought it was a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of cold and distant,
Mm-hmm.
which I can be around men. And then I realized that they were in a dress. And I'm like, oh, it's a woman. And then I became looser in a way, or maybe a little more flirtatious.
Uh-huh.
And then they opened their legs and there was a penis. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, oh, they're trans. And then I was something else then too. Like it was a new, like, oh, I don't have to be either of these sort of cold, aloof, or like flirtatious, please desire me. It was
Uh-huh.
something more weird and crooked that I got to become. So yeah, I'm just thinking of the way that like we co-create these positionalities, right? Like maybe we're not thinking about maleness when we're together, but then women were in the circle, we might relate to that and like how it's based on the polarity that we have to work with this. I don't know if that's quite what you're saying, but
Yeah, yeah. We live in the world of duality, of opposites, and they co-arise and they create each other, and we
yeah.
swim in that. And I mean, I guess I think about where what we've been calling masculine qualities are weak in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's my responsibility to embody this, for example, in the relationship. I don't necessarily think of that. I think like where am I not mature as a human being and where do I need to
Mm,
develop? And sometimes those are in the category of what we call masculine and sometimes they're in the category of what we call feminine.
I love that break. Like, yeah, like it's not this sort of essentializing that there's like all masculine, all feminine that can kind of sometimes happen in like spiritual and gross circles, especially if there's like an archetypal element in it.
Yeah.
But it's more like, what do I need to work on? And sometimes it has these qualities to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. And maybe that implies there's some reflection on the conditioning or the cultural container of why that's difficult to work with or be with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's
Huh.
when the hidden socializing becomes revealed.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I kind of like that there's like a full circleness here in a way that like I started asking you like, are there other words for this? And you're like, I
Uh-huh.
don't think there's other words. And then you're like, I don't even think about being masculine. Like both these maybe are true. Like we live in a world where masculine and feminine are reified and sort of like about to be a dad. And if
Congrats.
yeah, thank you. Like
Wow.
my wife's maybe entering the second trimester. I don't know time that well,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm like scared of like it's gonna be a boy and like everyone making it a boy. Like just from the very beginning, like, oh boy, and like
Hmm.
here's it, all the toys, and everything. I'm like, oh man, this is gonna suck.
Why? Why? I don't understand.
I just like wanting to give them some of that room for that fluidity,
Ah.
to not have that box kind of put on so strongly from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
that they can
Yeah.
explore earlier their own playfulness around maleness, not maleness, and all of
Mm.
that. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that was my fear of,
Yeah.
yeah. So I lost my thread there, but
It's okay. Congratulations. It's interesting.
yeah, thank you.
Interesting thread. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, hmm. Anything for you here?
Well, one thing I'd add is I part of the reason there's a number of reasons I think that I don't think I have a strong identity as a man. And one of them is I didn't have a man raise me and tell me what it meant.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
I don't know if how true this is for everybody or generationally, but I think a lot of men got a narrative from the men in their family that said this is what it means to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
Man up, you don't do that.
Mm-hmm. And
Or
and
a
that's
man,
explicit, right? The man up, don't do that. But then there's the
yeah,
implicit messaging of this is what
exactly.
that my father treated my mom, and my father
Yes,
moves through space.
yeah,
Yeah.
imprinted
Yeah.
explicitly and implicitly, and I, for better or worse, that I didn't get that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and those narratives have an effect.
Yeah. Yeah. So in some ways there may be benefit for you there of some freedom, and some ways an absence maybe that
Yeah, totally.
yeah. I even
Leaving the
remember oh no, please go.
I was going to say, leaving the one of the things about leaving the monastery and now making a living for myself is having to embody agency more, because the monastery is so communal
Mm-hmm.
and the individual effort is so de-emphasized
Mm-hmm.
because it's like a living network. And so I feel like life is giving me an opportunity to develop those things
Yeah.
that I previously hadn't worked on so much.
What are you seeing as you sort of take on more of the network yourself, right? Running your own life and not
Uh-huh.
having that communal support. Like, how is that shaping this for you?
It feels good to bring into balance what was out of balance.
Yeah.
So like reclaiming more agency and more responsibility for my own life and my own problems, it something in there is empowering and energizing,
Hmm.
and I'm happier now.
Was that part of the call for you in a way to leave the monastery to reclaim some of this, or
I think so. It wasn't conscious, but now I can see it,
yeah?
because it was so easy to lean into the role and the teachers, and that everything was basically taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
that I've had to face more uncertainty and more ambiguity now, and I
No.
think that's been healthy.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Like, like you get training in facing it, and then you stepped away from that to like live it a bit more. It sounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate kind of getting to riff with you a second time. Is
Likewise.
anything kind of you want to share that you're offering right now? Like what's going on in Jogan's world where people can connect?
Oh, sure. Well, I lead retreats through Zen Community of Oregon pretty
Hmm.
regularly.
And they're online these days, right? So people can kind of
They're
connect from those
online.
all over.
Yeah, yeah. So by the time this gets up, the next one that'll be on the horizon is in June. I'm doing a retreat called No Hindrance.
Hmm.
And through parts work, which we touched on a little bit, working with obstacles to transformation.
Mm.
So we have these aspirations to change in these different ways or to practice this or that. And what gets in the way of that? Why does that get derailed?
Mm.
And so we want to really understand in an embodied and direct way those forces.
Yeah, that sounds so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm interested in how we can work with this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's in June through Zen Community of Oregon, and then I do one-on-one work in everything we talked about:
Yeah.
the meditation stuff, the part stuff, the emotional stuff, the
Yeah.
all of that, and love working with people like that. So
Yeah.
you can find out more about that at solisluna.org.
And I'll put a link to that for folks.
Thanks. Yeah.
And you're doing a movement thing too a bit, right?
Oh yes, that's
Yeah.
actually the dearest thing to my heart. It's called Universe Somatic,
Which
and
is
it's a
the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful kind of retreat or workshop names, I think. So
yeah. Thanks. And you came to it once,
yeah,
didn't you?
I did a day long once. I really
Yeah,
loved it. It was cool. It was cool for me because I've always been interested in Dzogchen too. So I got to
yeah,
taste Dzogchen and whatever else you added to the mix.
yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe, but it's a practice of meditation and movement combined. And in the movement, we're evoking energies
Hmm.
and loosening identity and playing, and then we bring that back into the sitting because they alternate.
Yeah, it reminds me of the practice you described earlier. Not the same, right? But like when I did it, we would sit for 20 minutes and then you would offer a move, like an energy to move, whether that was sort of divine light or like the fluidity of water. I don't remember the
Yeah.
exact
Uh huh.
captures, but and then
Yep.
you move that and then you sit and then those energies move still in you as you're sitting and you get to kind
That's
of
the
be,
hope. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. That's a good description. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I'm gonna hire you. No, right.
You need some copywriting, let
I
me
need a
know.
copywriter. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do that Monday nights.
And that's through Zoom right now.
That's through Zoom. Uh huh. Yep.
Yeah. And do you find
Yep.
that works well? Kind of people in there.
Surprisingly well. I was so surprised. I just thought, can this really work in this way? For some people, it's better because they're less self conscious.
Mm-hmm.
You're not in the group. A lot of people aren't comfortable moving their body
Yeah.
other than like, the normal range.
Yeah. We sitting, standing, walking, maybe running sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So people are at home and,
Yeah.
I don't ask them to be in front of their computer. So when they move, they're in their privacy of their home. And I'm hearing that it's easier for some people.
Like they can touch in deeper in a way to those energies because they're not sort of having to filter through the social lens.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, man. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you so
on.
much. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much, Jogan. Thank you.
Likewise. I feel like I
Yeah.
learned a lot from you.
Oh, mutual.
Okay.